4:30. The time is 4:30 p.m. Israel Standard Time. Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi. Masechet Shevuos. Daf Zayin Beis. Tractate Shevuot. 7b. Top of the page with the word Uchetiv Hatam. Uchsiv Hasam. And it is written there with regard to the red heifer, the paraduma, whoever touches the corpse of a man who died and is not sprinkled, he will have contaminated the tabernacle of God. He will be impure, his impurity is still upon him. Numbers chapter 19, verse 13. This verbal analogy teaches that just as there, the verse is referring to the defiling of the temple, so too here the sliding scale offering is brought to atone for the defiling of the temple. Ve'ela ba lamali. The Gemara asks, but if so, why do I need the term through which, the word ba? Leviticus 5:3. The Gemara earlier derived from this term that one who is impure and unwittingly eats truma is not liable to bring a sliding scale offering. The Gemara has now derived that the sliding scale offering atones specifically for the unwitting defiling of the temple. If so, it is obvious that one is not liable for unwittingly eating truma, and the phrase is superfluous. The Gemara answers the term through which serves to include one who was rendered impure by eating the unslaughtered carcass of a kosher bird. Unlike other impure items, which render impure any person who touches them, the carcass of a kosher bird renders a person impure only if he eats it. Therefore, one might have thought he would not be liable for entering the temple if he was rendered impure by eating the carcass of a kosher bird. The extra term is therefore necessary to teach that one is liable. Ho'amrit bo me'utahu mishum de me'utahu iyatar kasiv okiga devar nigia in delavar nigia lo uchetiv ba me'uta have miut achar miut ve'en miut achar miut el rabois. The Gemara challenges, but didn't you say above that the term through which is a restriction? How can you now use it to include additional cases? The Gemara explains, it is precisely because it is a restriction that it includes additional cases. As is written at the beginning of that verse, or if he will touch an impurity of a man, Leviticus 5:3, which indicates that one who is impure with a form of impurity that can impart impurity through touching, yes, he is liable for defiling the temple by entering it in his impure state. But if one is impure with a form of impurity that cannot impart impurity through touching, then one would not be liable. Therefore, the verse opens with a restriction, and when the verse continues, and it is written through which is also a restriction, this constitutes a restriction after a restriction, and a restriction after a restriction serves only to amplify the halacha, applying it to additional cases. Yesh b'yediyah b'tchila v'ein b'yediyah b'soif soyer na'aseh b'fnim v'chulei Tanu Rabbanan v'chiber al hakodesh mitomas b'nei Israel v'goymer. The Mishnah continues, for cases in which one had awareness at the beginning, but then transgressed during a lapse of awareness, and still had no awareness at the end, the goat, whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary on Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur itself, suspend any punishment that he deserves until he becomes aware of his transgression, at which point he must bring a sliding scale offering. The sages taught in a Braita, the verse states with regard to the internal goat offering, and he shall effect atonement upon the sanctuary from the impurities of the children of Israel and from their acts of rebellion for all their sins. Leviticus 16:16. So it's partial. Wow. A lot of correlations. We had last week with the Negoyim, we have this week with the scapegoats. It's all connecting. Yesh li b'inyan ze la'avi shalish tumois tumas avodah zareh v'tumas gilei arayos v'tumas shvichas domim. With regard to this matter, meaning the atonement effected by the sacrifice of the goat, I can state that this verse serves to amplify the atonement by teaching that the goat offering atones for the following three sins, which the Torah is referring to as impurities. The impurity of the sin of idol worship, and the impurity of engaging in forbidden sexual relations, and the impurity of perpetrating bloodshed. Avodah zarah hu omer leman tames mikdashi b'gilui arayos hu omer u'shmarti levilti asayis b'goyis hatoyevois v'goyim lo titamu bahem b'shvichas domim hu omer v'lo titam me'asaretz yochol al shalish tumois halalu yehi soya mechaper tamed lo emar v'tumois b'nei Yisrael v'lo kol tumois. The Braita demonstrates that each of these sins is referred to as impurity. With regard to idol worship, the verse states, "For he had given his offspring to Molech in order to render impure my sanctuary." Leviticus 20, verse 3. With regard to forbidden sexual relations, the verse states, "You shall safeguard my charge not to do any of the abominable traditions that were done before you, and not to render yourself impure through them." Leviticus 18:30. With regard to bloodshed, the verse states, "The land will not atone for the blood that was spilled on it, except through the blood of the one who spilled it. You shall not render the land impure." Numbers 35:34. One might have thought that the goat offering would atone for these three types of impurities. To counter this, the verse states, "From the impurities of the children of Israel." Leviticus 16:16. The restrictive term "from" indicates that it atones for some impurities, but not for all impurities. Ma matzinu shechina kasud miklal kol tumois. Hadiyad betuas migdash b'kadosha v'afkan betuas migdash b'kadosha. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. The Braita derives the type of impurity for which the goat offering does atone. What do we find is the impurity that the verse differentiates from all the other impurities? You must say that the verse is referring to the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods. It is specifically for this transgression that the Torah provides one with the means of achieving atonement by bringing a sliding scale offering. So too here, since the verse limits the atonement of the goat offering to transgressions involving impurity, it is logical that it can also atone for the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Mimkomo hu mechla. Rabbi Shimon says it is not necessary to derive which transgressions the goat offering atones for by comparing the verse written concerning it to a different verse, rather from its own place, meaning from the verse about the atonement effected by the goat itself, it can be determined as it states, "And he shall effect atonement upon the sanctuary from the impurities of the children of Israel," which should be interpreted as saying that it atones for the defiling of anything sacred in a temple or its sacrificial foods. ובפשעים לכל חטאיהם. חטאיהם דומי לבשים, מה פשעים שאינם בני קורבן, אף חטאיהם שאינם בני קורבן. The writer continues, one might have thought that this goat offering would atone for all cases of the defiling of the temple, even where there was awareness at the beginning and at the end. To counter this, the verse states, and from their acts of rebellion and for all their sins, Leviticus 16:16, which indicates that the goat offering atones only for sins that are similar to acts of rebellion, just as it atones for acts of rebellion that are not subject to atonement through an offering, as sin offerings brought by an individual are brought only for unwitting sins, so too it atones only for sins that are not subject to atonement through an offering. As long as one does not become aware of a sin, it cannot be atoned for through the sliding scale offering. Accordingly, the goat will atone for it. וביניים יש בה ידיעה בתחילה ואין בה ידיעה בסוף, שסורר זה תוילה, תאמר לו ולכל חטאיסם, חייבי חטאיס במשהו. The Braita continues, and from where is it derived for a case in which one had awareness at the beginning but did not have awareness at the end? That is, that this goat suspends the punishment that he deserved until he becomes aware of his transgression. The verse states, for all their sins, from which it is indicated that the goat offering atones only for those who are potentially liable to bring a sin offering, meaning the sliding scale offering, should they become aware of their sin. We said about the Bible. we said about the Bible, יש לי בעניין זה להריש 3 תומוס. תומוס עובד הזורע, תומוס גילי הארץ, תומוס שפיכות דמים. The Gemara clarifies some of the details of the Braita. The Master said in the Braita, with regard to this matter, I can state that this verse serves to amplify the atonement by teaching that the goat offering atones for the following 3 sins, which the Torah is referring to as impurities: the impurity of the sin of idol worship, and the impurity of engaging in forbidden sexual relations, and the impurity of perpetrating bloodshed. The Gemara asks concerning this sin of idol worship, for which one might have thought the goat would atone, what are the circumstances? If you say the reference is to a case where he transgressed intentionally, then one can counter that he is subject to the death penalty, and no offering will atone for his sin. And if you say the reference is to a case where he transgressed unwittingly, then one can counter that he is liable to bring his own sin offering for his transgression, and the goat will not atone for him. The Gemara answers, the goat offering atones in a case where he transgressed intentionally, but witnesses did not forewarn him about his transgression, and therefore he is not liable to receive the death penalty. It also atones in a case where he transgressed unwittingly, but by the time Yom Kippur arrived, he had still not become aware of his transgression, and therefore he was not liable to bring an offering. I could say a case, I was thinking of a similar idea. Basically, it was a time when there were no witnesses, and he wanted to repent. He actually has to confess it himself. So he's not fighting the death penalty, but in that case, it atones for him. That's what they're saying here, I think.